Hello, I'm Michael. Thanks for joining me and deciding to continue with this exploration of how to turn slogans into powerful practices. This is part two. If you haven't seen part one, I highly recommend it. In part one, I explore the roots and the deep heritage of using slogans, aphorisms, wise sayings, and the like, proverbs, for personal growth, personal development, cross cultures, and throughout time, probably going back to the origins of language. So it provides some understanding of the basis of using words in this way. In this video, I want to introduce several more elements that can amplify the impact, the power of a basic slogan practice and turbocharge it, so to speak. I could just list these elements and describe them a little bit and suggest how they can be incorporated into the practice, but I want to provide more than that. I want to help you to understand the deeper roots of these things and how they are another part, they're also a part of our human heritage, stretching back through time and across cultures. And in sharing that with you, basically I'll be sharing my own learning journey through my life. Most of my adult life has involved learning these things. So where I want to start is going back in my life to the late 70s, when I was a student of cultural anthropology, eventually going on to get a bachelor's degree in it. And I was very fascinated by the way cultures throughout the world and throughout time, particularly indigenous cultures on different continents, faced the different common challenges of humanity through ritual and ceremony. It was so interesting, so colorful. The kinds of things that were so colorful to me were the music, the dance, the costumes, the ritual enactments of mythological stories, the way communities would come together, either for an individual or collectively, to make fashion meaning out of life, how to illuminate some sense of direction of how to live. And anyway, I found this really, really fascinating. So that was part of my introduction. I also developed an interest in shamanism, which also makes use of ritual and ceremony, but in the service of helping to heal a distressed or an ill person. The shaman makes use of these tools. From my mind, brought up in Western culture with science and reason being the underpinning of the way to look at the world, although indigenous rituals and ceremonies and shamanism were so fascinating to me, there were certain beliefs that seemed to come along with it that I couldn't quite subscribe to. We could call them superstitions, beliefs about how the world worked that didn't seem reasonable or rational to me. But I couldn't shake it off. I just felt that there was something there that had value. And I was very curious about understanding that. What I want to provide one example of a translation, we could call it, of a shamanic practice into a modern practice, where whatever so-called superstitious beliefs underlie the shamanic practice don't have to be a part of a modern practice that makes use of the same fundamental principles. One example of this that I find quite striking is what is called a soul retrieval. Across many shamanic traditions, this is a common practice. And the idea is that the person who comes to the shaman ill or distressed is ill or distressed because they have a part of their soul that's been lost. It might have been taken by evil spirits. It might have been taken by an enemy. There are a variety of things that could cause one to lose a part of one's basic self. Through ritual, through drumming, through entering a trance, the shaman ventures to the underworld, the invisible spiritual world underneath everything. And through navigating and contending with malevolent forces and dangers, the shaman finds, retrieves, and brings this part of the soul back to the person that they're working with. When they come back out of the trance, they return this to the person by breathing it into their nostrils, and the person inhales this part of themselves that they've lost. And it's the restoration of that part of their soul that facilitates their healing. They get better because they're now made whole. I don't know what you think. Maybe that makes sense to you. Many people would say that is not rational. That there maybe is no such place as an underworld and this doesn't happen. If you believe that, that's fine. But it doesn't have to be so to make use of that process. And in fact, I think modern psychoanalytic theory and practice is much in alignment with this. And I can explain this briefly. Instead of an underworld, there's the unconscious mind. And there's the idea in psychoanalysis that our symptoms are by and large a product of having suppressed and split off a part of ourselves, our memory, our experience, and relegated it out of our awareness into our unconscious mind. Through the process of talk therapy, through the process of free association, retrieving memories, becoming aware of this part of ourselves that we've made unconscious, and beginning to integrate that in our whole self, we facilitate a cure, or we facilitate a recovery and a healing from whatever psychological issues we've suffered with. Very similar, isn't it? Very similar to the soul retrieval. Different means, different set of beliefs, but it is the idea that there's been a lost part that has to be restored and reintegrated to make us whole. There are many other examples of this, but I just wanted to provide one. In addition to my study of anthropology, I also had more direct experience with ritual and ceremony in my study and practice of Tibetan Buddhism, which is very rich with ritual and ceremony and all of the elements that I'm going to talk about later. As well as that practice, my involvement in men's issues and men's work and men's groups over time, I encountered the same ideas and the same kinds of practices, rituals and physical enactments of things that are part of some of the men's work. They call it the mythopoetic dimension of men's work. And I don't want to go into that, but just to say that was another direct experience that I had with these things that I'd studied on a more abstract and vicarious level through anthropology. So if I take these different threads, my study of cultural anthropology through ceremony and ritual and shamanism, and I take my experience as a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism and my journey with men's work, I can boil it down to some basic components. There's more, but these seem fundamental and essential. And they are. I'm going to name them and then I will explore each one. First, I've already talked about in the first video, words, ideas, thoughts. That's one of the elements. Another one is visualizations, representations of the thing that is important, whether it's literal, whether it's abstract, whether it's external, whether it's internal. There's an image that is associated with the practice. Then there's sound / voice. How does one's own voice, in particular, that's what I'll focus more on, our own voice, become an element in our contemplation of words. So words, visualization, voice / sound, body, in terms of posture, gesture, and movement. How can the body get involved in a practice? What can we do with our body that will bring additional impact? And there's a fifth thing I want to mention, and it's really what is evoked by the first four, but I think we can also bring our attention to it, and that is the feeling. That's the experience in our bodies of what we're evoking through words, visualizations, voice, and our bodies. What does it feel like? What does it feel like? Savoring that, lingering with that, becoming aware of it. So these are the components, and I will talk about each one. And to go from a shamanic understanding to a more scientific understanding, we might consider that if we engage in all of these things, that we're activating various neural pathways in our brain and in our bodies. And if they're all on the same page, basically, they have a synergistic effect. They take advantage of the fact that our brains are plastic or malleable. They change. We can build new synapses. We can pare back some of the old ones so they're not so strong. So rather than explain things through supernatural causes, if you prefer a more modern understanding, this is the gist of what I would say is going on. We're bringing all of these different components together to activate multiple neural pathways in a synergistic way to create a particular effect. I won't spend a lot of time on each of one of these, but I do want to touch base on them. Perhaps you're getting the sense that it's vast, and it is. Each one of these is vast, but I don't want to dwell too long on each one. As I mentioned, in terms of visualization, we're going to, if you want to know more about words, the first element, you can watch the first video. But now I want to go on to visualizations. As I mentioned, they can be external representations, images that we see, or images that we create in our own mind that represent the value, the principle, or the intention that we're aiming at. In religious traditions, of course, there is religious iconography of various kinds. There's symbols, there are representations of mythological stories or historical stories that help to orient the mind to certain values and an understanding of one's place in the world. And this is true for indigenous cultures going back through time. There are ways that things have been represented in art, on cave walls, in totems, on cathedral ceilings. I have been to the Vatican and been into the Sistine Chapel a couple times to look up and see the representation of a lot of Christian iconography. I've also seen a lot of Buddhist iconography in the form of mandalas and tankas that represent either principles of Buddhism or historical figures. In psychology, visualizations are also used. Visualizing things internally has been demonstrated to enhance emotional regulation, calming oneself down. For athletics and music, it can enhance one's performance. Visualizations can be used to prepare for a challenging situation, whether it's a conversation with somebody we have a conflict with, or whether it's preparing for a job interview. Sometimes a therapist will facilitate the person imaginatively having this conversation, perhaps pulling up a chair and putting the other person imaginatively in it. So I've also already begun to suggest the use of voice. So there can be the visualization of situations or of environments that cause one to calm down, but there's also using our own voice. Using the voice is also a part of traditional ceremonies and rituals in terms of chanting, in terms of giving blessings, in terms of prayers, in terms of declaring vows, using the voice to give reality to the thoughts and to the intentions. In therapy, it's also used. You can use voice to talk to another part of yourself in therapy. It's called voice dialogue. Sometimes a therapist will pull up a chair and have you imagine another part of yourself sitting there, maybe a part that you don't like or you're uncomfortable with, and facilitate a conversation out loud with that part. Sometimes inviting you to sit in that seat and be that part and speak out loud from that part. Practicing difficult conversations out loud can also be a part of therapy, although we can do that without a therapist. Perhaps you've rehearsed for a job interview or rehearsed a proposal to your loved one, or rehearsed what you need to say to somebody you're in conflict with. To use the voice, to activate the body, at least in that way. The voice can be used through words, but we can also just make sounds to embody certain feelings. Maybe we could shout, yell, to express anger or joy, even, to get it embodied, to bring it to a full experience so it's not so abstract. So we have words, we have visualization, we have voice or sound, we have the body, our own body. And here, the idea is that words are not merely ideas. They can be felt in the body. They can be expressed through the body. They can animate our behavior. The body in general, in past few decades, has become increasingly a focus of psychotherapy, in particular training programs for focusing on the body, for recognizing that all of the psychological things that go into our makeup as human beings, all the traumas and the memories that we have and the difficulties that we've suffered with are not simply in our mind. They have been marked in our bodies, in our way of holding our body, our way of moving our body, certain kinds of tension, certain contractions, that we embody our minds. And body psychotherapy or body focused psychotherapy recognizes this and makes use of that to work directly with a client's body. I think it's worth recognizing that not only does the mind leave imprints on the body, but the way we are with our body can make imprints on the mind, right? So we can work with our body to have an impact on our mind. It's a mutually reinforcing situation. It's a reciprocal relationship. So let's pause for a moment, acknowledge what these components that I'm talking about are. Words, the words of a slogan or an aphorism, and the ideas that they represent. Visualizations, the representation visually of an example, whether symbolic or literal, of the thing we're thinking of, whether external or internal. Voice or sound, speaking the slogan out loud, giving expression to a certain principle, or hearing it. We could listen to something that represents the thing that we're interested in. For instance, if we want to become more ferocious and bold in our lives, we may want to roar like a lion. Can we roar like a lion? Can we listen to the roar of a lion? So voice and sound. And the body, through posture, gesture, and movement. How do we hold our body? How do we feel when we hold it that way? How do we feel when we make certain gestures? If we do this, what does it feel like? We do this, what does it feel like? We do this, what does it feel like? And again, engaging in all of these will flood the brain because it's activating multiple neural pathways in a synergistic way. And because of that, it has power. So hopefully in this video, I've been able to give you some sense of the roots through time and across cultures for these elements that can go into an enhancing a slogan practice. How, you may ask, do we bring those to bear? What do we actually do with those? That's the topic of the next video. What I want to do in the next video is provide 2 examples of how to bring these elements to a practice. One of the examples I'll give is rather elaborate. I think it's still fairly straightforward. It should be very understandable, but it's elaborate. The other one is very simple. And through these 2 examples, I want to show that there's a wide range of how it can be practiced. And again, the purpose of all of these 3 videos is not to tell you what practices to do. It's to equip you with the tools, the elements that go into these practices with an understanding and appreciation for the depth and breadth of how this is part of our human heritage. It's not a superficial thing. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and below you'll find a description of Attention Bazaar and a link to get there as well. I will leave a synopsis of this video in a link so that you can read it, and I'll boil it down to a very manageable thing so you get the main points. But that's all for now. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for sticking to the end. And please do join me for the 3rd part. I think you'll be interested. You'll be very interested in how these can be turned into powerful practices with examples of how that goes. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.